Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to The Scoop. I'm your host, Frank Chaparro, editor-at-large at The Block, and joining us today on The Scoop, for the first time together, which is a real treat, Solana co-founders Raj Gokal and Anatoly Yakovenko. Gentlemen, really appreciate you taking the time to hop on the show and do a bit of reflection, do a bit of forward thinking, and just have like a really, natural, fun conversation. Before we dive in, though, of course, I have to thank our sponsors, so let's go ahead and do that. Huobi, one of the world's leading virtual asset exchanges, has been providing convenient and professional virtual asset management services to more than 50 million users in more than 160 countries for nearly a decade. At Huobi, their mission is to make crypto accessible, to help you understand risks and make informed decisions to protect you and your assets. Learn more today at huobi.com. This episode is also brought to you by Ledn. From Bitcoin and USDC savings accounts to Bitcoin-backed loans, Ledn's financial services enable you to benefit from your holdings today without selling your Bitcoin. Learn more about Ledn at ledn.io. Ledn, where your digital assets come to life. All opinions expressed by hosts and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and not necessarily those of The Blocks. Podcast guests may have taken positions in the assets or other matters discussed in this podcast. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. For full terms, visit theblock.co/terms-service. Once again, I want to thank my guests, Raj and Anatoly, for coming on the show. Gentlemen, how are things going?
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Of course. It's been a wild few weeks. Not much has happened, really. We're just kind of, relaxing and not thinking about.
We had a great conference.
We had a great,
and then took a break right after that. Just took a nice, pleasant break.
So I talked to Austin, your head of comms, when everything started to unravel. I was like, how are you feeling? And he was... no one was feeling good in those first few days, but what have the last few weeks been like for you, Anatoly? There was obviously an initial shock of the FTX meltdown, and what's it been like? I know for you personally, and I'd say this for Raj too, you're not very easily distracted or very easily distractible, but I'm sure it was a blow.
Yeah, for sure. It was really strange. The whole experience was pretty strange for me because we had such an amazing conference. Like, despite the general bear market, we had like twice as many people show up to Breakpoint, like 3,600 attendees, which is kind of insane. The energy was awesome. And then on the flight back is when I started seeing this like shit happening over Twitter. And like just reconciling both of those things in my head is still like pretty weird. It really feels like that was like a year ago. Like everything that happened prior to this event was like ancient history. It's really, really, really strange feeling.
Yeah. And Raj, what about you?
Yeah, definitely feeling the effects of time dilation. Breakpoint definitely feels like at least a year ago, but same as Toly, I think we were riding high, and a lot of the feedback that we were getting was that Breakpoint was like DevCon in 2018, whereas Breakpoint of last year was like DevCon in 2017. So first you have the excitement and a lot of speculation and a lot of enthusiasts. And then in the follow-up, you have, just hundreds of builders that have real products to demo and, have a lot of excitement about what comes in the next year. But it's very fundamentals focused, and a lot of the noise is gone, and there's a lot of ability to just focus on product and what the technology enables. And yeah, I think it was definitely a shock what happened with FTX, but I think the feeling in the industry was generally that there was some other shoe or shoes to drop in this part of the market cycle. I just don't think anybody thought it was going to be FTX and that it was going to happen so quickly. But, a lot of people say it was unfortunate timing of having Breakpoint right before the FTX collapse. But actually, I think it was such a solidifying moment for the community where, again, after a year of just being so heads down, and the Solana ecosystem is very concentrated with very focused builders. Like you said, they're pretty hard to distract, and they tend to keep their mind away from the noise. but having them all come together and then have, a big event to organize around and defend the network against and show up and grow and step into leadership roles that maybe they felt overshadowed against and weren't ready to step into before the FTX collapse. I think it was a huge maturation moment for the network. So, I think it was actually very fortunate that everyone got together and had that camaraderie at Breakpoint and that hope and were reminded why they're here building. And then they got faced with a pretty big, uncertain and cataclysmic event and organized around it very quickly.
Obviously, for folks who maybe are unfamiliar a bit with the history, Solana was the darling of the last cycle, part of a cadre of coins that saw huge gains alongside maybe we'll say Luna and Avalanche and some of these coins that kind of dominated the news cycle of the last year or so. But I feel like the prominence, a part of sort of its public awareness, as it were, was tied to the rise of FTX as well. And, he was sort of an advocate, right, for Solana to a degree. When you sort of think about the history, obviously everything is more obvious or clear with the blessing of hindsight, but in all of those dealings, the building out of Serum, engaging with FTX and Sam, were there any things that in hindsight seemed a bit off?
So, we started Solana in 2018, and I think this was even before FTX existed. And we had literally this idea of blockchain and NASDAQ speed was at the core of what Solana was about. That was our pitch in our slide deck. This is what I explained, the 2-second elevator pitch was this is a really, really fast blockchain for NASDAQ style applications. And in 2020, right when we launched is when we got connected to Sam and FTX. And I don't know if you remember what Solana was like at the time. We barely had a functioning Explorer. The wallet was command line, but we were the first next generation chain to launch. So all the tooling was really, really bad, but we could actually demonstrate that a fast blockchain is possible. We had this demo called Break, still up and running today. You go to break.solana.com, you smash your keys and you see transactions confirm within 1.5 seconds. So you can fire them off as fast as you can. There's still no other chain that can do this. This is dumb demo. And this is what we demoed to Sam and their team. And this was early, I guess, what is it, May 2020 or something like that. FTX was, I think, a top 10 exchange, but barely at the time. They were up and coming, and they were also still very small. And they started stress testing our network just using Break, slamming it. And the next day, Sam was like, okay, we want to build a DeFi thing, but we don't want it to be a cheesy sidechain that's a knockoff of Ethereum. This tech seems like it could do what we want. So they put 4 of their engineers on this and built out Serum. And that was the start of that relationship. And that was very significant investment on their part.
What was interesting too there is that Break demo that Tolly mentioned. We gave that to basically everyone in the industry. We were back to back on phone calls all day for a month, demoing to everyone, the very visceral feeling of how fast transactions confirm on a globally distributed mainnet for Solana, because that was the thing that we had proven out. And the FTX team and Sam were the only ones that took the open source repo and immediately started stress testing the network and using that code to do their own performance benchmarking. And then they just moved so quickly after that.
In those early days, it was a very engineering driven relationship. We were close to their engineering team. There was a lot of quick turnaround time on product development. And that was that romance of 2020 was awesome. They could build stuff very quickly and build tooling on top, explorers, all this other shit. But with regards to flags or something like that, what happened later on, and you could start seeing that during the NFT boom in Solana, is that FTX became a much bigger brand, a much bigger thing, and started going at a very global direction where they're trying to grow FTX in the US all over the place. But we were focused on building stuff for self-custody users. This was the primary thing that we cared about, is how many people we get with wallets, with Phantom or whatever, and doing stuff on chain, actually using the network. And that's where you can kind of see like their participation in hackathons dwindled and stuff like that. And there was a bit of a kind of like, they just really weren't paying attention to like the core thesis, I think, that established that relationship. And in those early days, I thought they were super forward thinking, like Serum was going to be eventually the backbone of FTX, that it was so good. And like that team was so forward thinking that they were disrupting themselves with DeFi. Because I don't know, at that time in 2020, DeFi felt like it was really going to take like traditional finance by storm, right? And like take everything over. It felt like there was a chance of that happening.
Yeah. And Binance was already, showing that they were pretty forward thinking on launching Binance Smart Chain and bringing all their users over, but it felt like, doing it in half measure. But having a credibly neutral third party network that already existed, that's highly performant, that you could do, an on-chain central limit order book, which I think everyone was kind of anticipating existing at some point, but then actually having the fastest growing exchange, disintermediate itself with that product. That was the hope of, a cornerstone for Solana DeFi that gave the market a lot of interest and gave us a lot of excitement. And then what Tully mentioned around NFTs, I think that was a pretty clear fork in the road, because the goal, I guess, that the FTX team had and continue to have, just like Coinbase and Binance and others, was that NFTs should become just another asset in these centralized exchanges, and that, the product motion would be creating more custodial NFT exchanges or white labeling, FTX as a custodial NFT exchange. And they wanted our support in building something like that out. But our focus was in launching things like Metaplex and solving problems for creators. And at the time, the biggest issue for creators was royalty splits on chain, and being able to launch their own auctions and not wait for, somebody like Nifty Gateway, which, again, was that centralized custodial marketplace. So at that point, I think one of the, little things that Sam mentioned was that he didn't see the aesthetic beauty of NFTs. So I think that was an example of just where there was a divergence in how we were viewing that new asset. And obviously, I think it's pretty exciting now to see that focusing on self-custody users and open source software has created this huge boom. It's what, captured most of the users and active addresses on Solana. There's like over 7.5 million wallets that hold NFTs. And that all came through organic, open source competition that resulted in things like Magic Eden and Hyperspace and all these other, multi-billion-dollar companies existing.
Mm-hmm. What do you think maybe we can double click on or explore, rather, the juxtaposition between this market's capital market participants and the technologists? I feel like it's fairly interwoven, and sometimes the technologists are expected to sort of be capital markets people, and vice versa. The capital markets people are thought of as being involved in the technology. I wonder, do you think that there will be some form of a backlash, or do you feel a sort of negative sentiment among the more developer type of person relative to some of the lenders and these traders and these investors? Do you think that the technologists in this industry are viewing the latter as mercenaries?
I think that tension really comes to a head in like the value capture part. Cause like, I think, at least to me, DeFi has proven itself like over and over again through like through the 2020 shit show, right? And then through this shit show, you see that like DeFi protocols actually succeeded. Even Serum, the code, like was fine. And like, because it was open source, it was quickly repaired, even if like, there was a centralized organizational failure. The people that are using the code were really, really quickly able to completely like work around those problems. That to me is like testament to how these systems are supposed to work. But like all this stuff becomes really hard for engineers, and like fuzzy is like, what's the point of like the Serum token? What's the point of the Uniswap token or the Aave token? Are they actually, can they capture value, or will they always be forked out if like that ever becomes necessary? Like it becomes kind of there's no like clear product market fit there that everyone can point to and say, this is the way things should be done, and it's proven and it works, and it's a stable model that shows like great growth and development and reinvestment and stuff like that.
I guess one other way to put the question, maybe more succinctly, is putting aside the actual sentiment. As an industry, how can we sort of have an ecosystem in which the technology companies or the blockchain projects that are building are not so susceptible, I guess, to a capital markets or a trading ecosystem that's like rife with leverage and a lack of controls and greed and, very little clarity around what collateral should be, et cetera? Or is that always just going to, kind of hang over as a cloud until maybe, more sophisticated firms enter the market? Projects like Solana will kind of have to worry about to a degree.
I think you gotta just keep investing in the open source technologies and like pushing more and more stuff on chain. And that's at the end of the day, like there's users and people that want to take I guess maybe they're reducing smart contract risk. That could be an argument to use something centralized.
Yeah.
But they're taking on other risks that have proven themselves like over and over to be like just very, very bad and just fall over in like very bad ways.
Yeah, exactly. And it seems like the smart contract risk is very clearly less risky. Can we say that definitively or no?
I would agree with you. When it fails, it's pretty bad. Like, I mean, Wormhole is one, right? That's a pretty good example, but it's very contained. It doesn't create these like massive over leveraged loops and dominoes that just totally fall apart. So I don't know.
Also, I think everything great in crypto needs to benefit. I mean, Solana's bet is we should bet on Moore's law for performance, but I think everything in crypto should be betting on Lindy effect. And you can't really have Lindy if if it's not open source and, if you're not forking out, like Tully mentioned, it could be the token, it could be anything. But once something's iterated on, it becomes a really, everlasting Lego to build off of. And as long as we do that, the smart contract risk comes down over time. Whereas, custodial risk and transparency risk of, what folks are doing in an opaque way in a centralized exchange is just going to keep recurring as long as, the reserves and liabilities aren't transparent, which DeFi always brings.
Huobi, one of the world's leading virtual asset exchanges, has been providing convenient and professional virtual asset services to more than 50 million users in more than 160 countries for nearly a decade. At Huobi, their mission is to make crypto accessible, building the go-to hub for the next billion crypto users. Huobi believes crypto shouldn't have any barriers to entry. Huobi is committed to asset and platform security to help you understand risks and make informed decisions to protect you and your assets. Learn more today at huobi.com. I also want to give a shout out to Ledn. Ledn, Bitcoin-backed loans and savings by Bitcoiners for Bitcoiners. As we've seen, not all digital asset lenders are created equal. Ledn prioritizes safeguarding clients' assets with its robust risk management approach. That is why Ledn doesn't actively trade or invest in DeFi yield generation strategies with its clients' assets, and only supports Bitcoin and USDC, two of the highest quality and most liquid assets in the industry. Ledn is also dedicated to transparency, which is why they are the first digital asset lending company to complete a proof of reserves attestation. Learn more about Ledn at ledn.io. Ledn, where your digital assets come to life. So hopefully, we'll see. It's a weird question, and maybe this is just cope, but it seems like this is something that could spur further adoption of decentralized lending and exchange protocols. We've seen a bit of an uptick in the data of usage of DeFi exchanges. Is that a flash in the pan, or could it have sticking power?
That, I don't know. I think it depends what's going to drive the next cycle. This one was, I think, driven by the price of Bitcoin, and most people go get Bitcoin on a centralized exchange. Is that something that's going to change for the next cycle? Like, I would hope so. I hope the next one comes from like real user adoption and like real like use cases actually getting penetration with self-custody. And if you have the self-custody piece, you don't need centralized exchanges. They're here as like an intermediate step while people haven't figured out how to deal with cryptography.
What do you think, Raj?
Yeah, I mean, this has always been the bet for Solana as well, that the new thing that exists is cryptography in the hands of normal people. And that's only really being used if they're, if they're doing self-custody and signing their own transactions every day. I think in the last cycle, we felt a little contrarian at times, sticking to that and trying to scale that part to millions of people. And I think what we're seeing in this cycle is like probably 10x the number of folks as the last cycle are aware of the pitfalls of not having your own keys for your own crypto. And I think maybe in the next cycle, hopefully we can avoid the cataclysmic, forcing function for 10x people to know the value. But there's a very strong, memorable story now for why you want to have your own keys and your own crypto, and go self-custody.
For Solana specifically, I think DeFi TVL has kind of come down a bit, or collapsed.
It's gotten
but
gotten hit by go ahead.
No, I was going to say it's like, on one side of the coin you have that, but I've noticed that the NFT volume is actually still pretty good. Maybe Solana's bet should be less the fastest decentralized version of NASDAQ to some sort of NFT centric chain.
I think the breaking and healing of Solana DeFi is like basically kind of a almost like it had to happen. I think in retrospect, too much of it relied on like Alameda's liquidity and like their participation in Serum and stuff. And that Band-Aid got ripped off really, really quickly. And now it's got to repair. Mm-hmm. So the repairing process started like within 24 hours. And the kinds of people that brought back Serum and started market making on it were not the big famous market makers. It wasn't like the big brands. It was the small like community hobbyists that were just doing it, because they were like fans of Mango or participating in Mango or Atrix or any of the other protocols that use Serum. And those are the folks that came together and like rebuilt it and got it going again. And that's what needs to happen, I think. And the reason why the NFT ecosystem is so healthy is because that was started in a very organic way by just people forking Metaplex.
And it wasn't sort of, built up or concentrated. The buildup wasn't concentrated in maybe one sort of firm or entity.
Yep. And now we get like a chance to do it over with, I think, a very organic set of teams and folks that are going to build awesome products. I think at the end of the day, like I think the two kind of interesting things in crypto are self-custody and then DeFi. And like I think under the hood, NFTs are DeFi. Royalties and all these other like ways to make money with NFTs for creators are some form of financial instruments, right? And their enforcement is done through smart contracts that are very similar to DeFi smart contracts at the end of the day. And I think as these things actually grow, right now they're pretty small. These are very small brands, very small little social networks, but I don't know if this is possible, right? But there is a future where you can start seeing, like, if you squint hard enough, that like some of these projects end up being like the next Marvel, right? The next Hello Kitty or whatever in the world. And that's very possible. And then at that scale, I think these systems are going to be very much like DeFi is today.
Yeah. Well, the architecture is not totally different.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, it's just a bit bigger audience. I think we've talked about this in the past. There's only so many people who care about, more efficient trading, but, art and cultural things are appealing to a wider range of folks.
For sure. And when we're focusing on like making the network better for finance, right? Making it faster, cheaper, all that stuff ends up just having better UX for all these other like Web3 applications. No one's going to complain if block times go from 400 milliseconds to 200 milliseconds. People are only going to be happier, right? Like, so those are all very much aligned.
What else is on the repairing process for Solana DeFi? What else is in that process?
Yeah, I think what was interesting, there's already like competition
Mm-hmm.
for like central limit order books, like Ellipsis. There was a big talk from Jerry on building out a next generation club, which is indicative of like kind of the code rot that like Serum ended up in, that there wasn't that much development or that much effort being put into getting into the next version, that there was already like native teams on Solana were like, well, that's a big part of the DeFi ecosystem, but I can go after it because there's nobody really like heads down pushing it as fast as they can. So that kind of competition, I think, was awesome to see even before this collapse. But now I think kind of the field is wide open for people to become that corner, some other team to become that cornerstone. I think that's really important, like DeFi side, as well as getting more Lindy around lending protocols and like AMMs like Orca and stuff like that. And that's slowly happening. You saw that like Jupiter and Orca and those folks had their highest volume days during this like kind of shit show. And the network itself, we've been through like congestion and outage hell like this year.
Yeah.
But like right during Breakpoint, we had the vast majority of the fixes that were in the pipeline to address those problems were in. And you actually saw that like during these massive volume spikes, the network got slammed with a big pile of bots from liquidation, but everything more or less worked as expected.
Do you think we'll ever see a return to the heady days of DeFi summer, like the juicy yields and the yield farming? What did we see, like 100,000% or 1,000,000% yields?
Unlike
on like pickle swap and whatnot.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, we should have known. How do we not know?
Yeah. Yeah, the vegetable coins.
The vegetable coins, the food coins, as it were.
Yeah, the food coins.
I mean, we should have known.
I think those memes are probably had their flash in the pan moment, and the next generation of adoption cycle is going to be more serious and like more like down to earth and like with real products.
Like Solana phone.
That's a self-custody solution. That's like pretty obvious to everyone. Like, why doesn't your phone have the seed phrase in the secure enclave?
So what happens next with that? The saga.
Yeah, I've got one right here. It's getting very close to launch, and like I think as you've seen on Twitter, it's becoming more and more important that there is an alternative path for launching applications on mobile that isn't tied to the big app stores and their moderation policies.
The boogeymen.
They could shut down MetaMask and Phantom and the Cash and like the Coinbase wallets. Like all the self-custody solutions right now depend on the benevolence of Apple and Google. That's pretty scary.
Yeah. And it sounds like you don't think they'll be benevolent for much longer.
I think what can keep them in check is credible competitors, even if small. Like even if we're selling a very tiny amount of phones per year, the fact that it exists and it's getting traction with the right folks, like with the 1% of people in the world that use self-custody like actively, if we're getting traction with them, I think that could keep the big app stores in check.
Fair enough. Well, gentlemen, maybe I can get, as we wrap up, your 2023 outlook. What are you most excited about? We can start with you, Toll. It's my new nickname for you, I guess, Toll.
I'm excited about the 114 release. It's even faster than 113. It's got a bunch of improvements and performance. During Breakpoint, I laid out I think, 6 or 7 problems and challenges to be solved in the Solana protocol, and some of them are really, really cool. The big and hard one, I don't know if we can get to this one in the next year, is having the ability for multiple concurrent block producers, so multiple leaders at the same time, making blocks at the same time. And this is without sharding in a single state machine. And that's a really, really cool thing because it really creates very strong and robust competition for meth, which is, I think, a really core part of how these permissionless open blockchains work. is if you don't have competitive math, you end up with, I think, a very bad environment for users, for finance, for transparency around how blocks are made. And like, I think it's very important for that to be as competitive as possible.
Raj, which of the 7 problems do you think are most important to solve?
7 problems. Well, I was just going to answer the question about what I'm excited about in general.
Hit me.
I think, well, a couple of things. So we talked about Saga, a few thousand developer kits have sold out, shipping in December, and the end user units are shipping in Q1. So I think we'll start to see, really exciting mobile native applications. And we're doing another hackathon in Q1 where I think there are a lot of developers emboldened by, recent events to go and become leaders of the ecosystem, and build around the stuff that's still here through this market cycle. And then I think we didn't talk about FireDancer, but, Jump has their second validator client that has been benchmarked in a test environment to 1.2 million TPS. So I think performance and stability in the next year are going to be moved forward very quickly. And all of this coming together, I think, should result in some really great surprises that just make use of block space in ways that we haven't seen.
Got it. Just do me a favor. If anyone approaches you and asks to work with you and they talk a lot about veganism and effective altruism, just stay away. Just turn around. Well, guys, appreciate you taking the time to sort of give us this quick update. And I'm sure there'll be plenty of news to unpack in the new year. Thanks again for taking the time.
For sure. Thank you.
Thanks, Frank.
Awesome.
Take care.
Thank you. The Scoop will be back for you again with another great guest, or maybe 2. Thanks for listening. Looking for more great insights from The Block? Check out The Block Research, the premier platform for research content on crypto markets and the digital asset industry. The Block Research membership includes cutting-edge reports, webinars, company maps, and more, available via our dedicated research portal. Visit theblockresearch.com to find out how to join today, or contact a member of our sales team at sales@theblockcrypto.com and let them know that Frank sent you.